We like to think of ourselves as totally independent beings who never need help from anyone, or at least I do. But of course, we all need help from time to time. Can you think of a time when you have really needed help, when you definitely couldn't manage on your own? I have many stories, of course, but a particularly good one happened when I was about 17. I was driving in freezing rain. I knew to go slowly, of course, but I had to merge from a clover leaf, and the curve of the road made my car start to fishtail. My car did a 180, and I wound up going backwards down the ramp and landing in a snowbank. No one was injured, but the wheels were spinning, and I couldn't get the car out. My car was far enough from anywhere I could walk safely for help, and this was well before cell phones were common, so I didn't have a way to call for help. As I stood by the side of the road, trying to figure out what I was going to do, a woman pulled up in a minivan and asked if I needed help. I said yes, and she drove me back to my house and went on her way. My parents weren't home, but my neighbor was, and he drove me back to my car and helped me dig it out. I'm not sure what I would have done that day without that random person who stopped by to see if I needed a ride. Any illusion of self sufficiency I might have had was broken when my 1988 Sable was stuck and no longer able to get me home. Of course, anyone who has had to deal with a medical event knows what it's like to need the care of others too. Kate Bowler, who is a professor of American religion, an author, and a podcaster, talks about how much she realized she really needed others when she was diagnosed with cancer. She describes how she tried to be a model patient, being cheerful, following directions, staying positive, but she quickly realized that her own power had its limits. She couldn't do her own anesthesia. She couldn't perform surgery on herself while she was recovering. She couldn't change her own bandages. She couldn't administer her own chemo. It was in her power to follow directions, advocate for herself, and rest. But beyond that, she had to entrust her treatment and recovery to others. She also had to trust that her body would be able to knit itself back together and fight off infections. And she couldn't control that either. She couldn't really do much of anything to heal herself by herself. She isn't a cancer researcher or a doctor, and after all, even cancer researchers and doctors also need help when they get sick. As soon as she started treatment, any illusion that she could be the one who would heal herself fell away. We like to think we don't need other people, but we do, all the time. In Jesus' time, leprosy was an illness that required quarantine for the health of the rest of the community. If you had it, of course, that meant you had to say goodbye to your home and to friends and relatives. It meant being unable to touch or hug loved ones. It meant being unable to work, being unable to come over for dinner. It meant being totally dependent on the charity of others to survive. And leprosy was incurable, so a diagnosis of leprosy was a life sentence of separation. When Jesus heals 10 people with leprosy in today's gospel, he is not just healing their bodies. He tells them to go and show themselves to the priests. Why? Not to show off his work, but so that they can be restored in relationship to their community. Their healing means they are no longer cut off from the ones who love them. Who can say why only one person, one foreigner, one outsider turned back to give thanks? Perhaps the other 9 hadn't realized yet what had happened to them. Perhaps they weren't ready to trust that this could be true, or perhaps they weren't ready to acknowledge that this healing wasn't their own doing or wasn't up to chance, but it was a gift from God. Jesus brought these 10 people out of a kind of death and back into full life. He proclaimed that the faith of the Samaritan had made him well, the faith that was his relationship with God, the faith that helped him to remember that he wasn't alone, even in the midst of such extreme separation. When healing takes place, it's a communal event. This story of healing is also a story of resurrection. Resurrection, however, and whenever it happens, is evidence of the ways God is working in our lives. It's not always as dramatic as someone with a life-altering illness being completely cured, but sometimes It's as simple as being offered a ride by a kind stranger when you're stuck by the side of the road, or being given a compassionate care in the midst of illness. Resurrection isn't something we can do for ourselves. It's a restoration enacted by God. It's grace we don't deserve or even expect. In the age of one-click ordering, it's so easy to forget that all we have comes from God. None of it is actually our own doing, but when we do remember we can't do any of this life alone, it's easier to remember how deep our connections are to each other and how essential it is to acknowledge those connections. This next week, many of us will gather with family or friends to give thanks in a holiday instituted during the Civil War to foster goodwill in the midst of a bitterly divided nation. While there is plenty of mythology of Thanksgiving that invites critique, there is something beautiful about coming together as we consider the ways God has been active in our lives, as we give thanks for the glimpses of resurrection and grace we've been fortunate enough to witness. This American holiday is juxtaposed against the very American mythology of independence and individualism, which often leaves us feeling disconnected and alone. If I'm allowed to think that I'm doing it all myself, the pressure to be perfect is strong, and there's no one to blame but myself when things go wrong. But noticing the ways in which we are constantly lifted up by others gives us a window into the ways in which God shows up in our lives. It helps us to notice all the other ways we are not alone. So, what do you give thanks for? How is God showing up in your life? In the midst of our busy lives, in the act of giving thanks gives us an opportunity to pause and notice that we're not alone and never have been. That even on our worst days, God is always with us, bringing us out of death and into the fullness of life.